we go. So, David, I'm going to hand over to you. We've got a lot of people in anticipation. So over to you, my friend.
Wes, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Without further ado, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Most of us have had to navigate through some rough waters through the pandemic and economic challenges. We are here to provide some insight on how to keep our workplace positive and lead through uncertainty. My name is David Blaine, and I'm a partner and Director of Entrepreneurial Services here at McKonly Asbury, and we are really excited to team up today with our business partner, Dale Carnegie, to bring you this webinar. We are super excited right now and honored to welcome the most senior leader at Dale Carnegie and Associates, President and CEO Joe Hart, who is going to provide us some leadership insights for building a positive workplace culture. Be sure to submit any questions you may have during the presentation through the webinar software, and at the end we will try to get through as many questions as we can. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. It's great to see you. Great to be here with everyone today. And this is certainly an important topic as we navigate through COVID-19. You know, I think about where we were even a year ago. I remember the day in January, I was sitting in my office in New York, and Jean-Louis Van Dorn, who's our chief franchise advocate, came into my office, and he had this look on his face, this look that was just really concerned. And I said, Jean-Louis, what's going on? And he said, you know, we've got a real problem. And last night I was on a call with our teams in China, and there's this virus, and it is causing the government ultimately to close down cities, and that our operations are going to be closed down for what could be weeks or months. So we sat down in that moment, both of us just trying to figure out exactly what the right thing to do was. And as we decided to move forward, he had talked about a task force that we had created really to help our teams, first in China, and then ultimately in Asia, go from what had been a 100% our Dale Carnegie programs delivered in person to one that would enable our operations, our North American operations that are live online, to take that learning so that people all over the world, and starting with China, could deliver online. And over all of last year, it was a pivotal time for our Dale Carnegie organization, 108-year-old company, 200 operations in 86 countries, but really to flip our business and to really transform ourselves digitally was a huge undertaking. And part of what enabled us to do that successfully to today, where now we can deliver live online, in person, blended all over the world, was a culture that we had that really was in what ways can we do this? A culture that was open to change, a culture that was agile. And as COVID progressed, clearly we had to make changes in our culture to continue during very challenging, clearly, and scary times. As leaders, we have faced and we continue to face a whole range of different challenges, right? I mean, a number of issues that go to our core values. How are we going to operate? What kinds of decisions are we going to make? Questions around employees who are looking for information. They don't know what's happening. Even now, we can see a light coming at the end of this tunnel, and still there's a lot of concern, a lot of fear. Fear about the economy. Are we going to bounce back? Are there going to be continued lockdowns as there are in Europe right now? So there are a number of challenges that impact the culture and impact us as leaders, and all of these have implications then on how employees are going to respond and how people are going to feel. Whether it's around trust, whether it's around fear, whether it's around burnout, we constantly are hearing and reading about, we know about in our organizations that people are tired after a year plus of all that we've gone through as a world. So what we're going to talk today about are four proven strategies for building better cultures, more resilient, more effective cultures that can drive growth and be high performing. And these are strategies for leaders. We'll talk about blind spots. We'll talk about really creating these transparent cultures where people are psychologically safe, where they feel like they can take risks, they can collaborate, they can work together. And ultimately, how do we create a more resilient workplace? But before we get too far in, though, I'd like to start with a poll. And let's just get a benchmark or baseline of where we are, people on this webinar. So the question is, how do you feel remote work this past year has impacted your organization's culture? You know, we know certainly some people have said, wow, we haven't missed a beat. Our culture is stronger. Others have said, hey, we haven't had any change. And others have said, it's hurt our culture. So I'm going to turn this over to Wes, who is our tremendous producer today, to walk us through how this poll is going to work.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Joe. And in the bottom left of the right of the screen, you should actually see the poll questions. All you have to do is click a radial button just to the left of the one that best resembles your particular response. And then just don't forget to click gray submit button in the bottom right. And once you've done that, we can see how we poll as a group.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the results from this group. I've delivered this presentation in different places, and certainly we've seen, you know, different results. And Wes, I know you've seen this too in your work. I mean, some cultures that have gotten stronger, some that have gotten weaker, some that are thinking, hey, this is still a moving target. What can we do to continue to improve our culture? So, looking forward to seeing how our participants today, our people today, respond.
Absolutely. So I've just closed the poll, just waiting for the software to calibrate the results, and we'll be able to see how we poll as a group anonymously, just be able to see the trends, what seems to be sticking out there. Okay, so here we go, and I'm just going to share those poll results. So Joe, what are we looking at there?
So it looks like culture's gotten stronger is the highest mark here. I'm trying to figure out 31% stronger. 24% no change, 28% it's hurt, so it's pretty evenly split, Wes. So I guess that gives us a good sense of where we are to start. So let's then talk about how we can, all of us, work to improve our cultures. And let's start with this first idea, which is around leadership blind spots. And I remember this day so clearly. I was driving. There's a two-lane road north, two-lane road south. I was in the left lane, basically the fast lane. I had to get over. You know, looked in my rearview mirror, didn't see anything, moved over, and smack, I hit this car that was there. I couldn't see it. And clearly, we know that there are things sometimes we can't see, things about ourselves that we can't see. And these are things that create the lost opportunities, or when we can figure out what they are and improve on them, we can effectively motivate people really to be far more effective and to give their best efforts. Part of what we do as Dale Carnegie is we do research around the world. We conducted a cross-cultural research survey in 14 countries, and we asked people, you know, what are the behaviors that really inspire you to want to give your best work? What are the things that bring out your best, that motivate you? And you can see the results, you know, from left to right, the highest being, you know, when my supervisor respects my opinion, that's really, really important to me. Or gives sincere appreciation, or truly listens, all the way down to 63% doesn't do all the talking. Then we asked, okay, well, how often do you see these types of things from your supervisor? And as you can see by the purple bars, what the results were. So with respect to opinion, 58% said, you know, most of the time or all of the time, my supervisor respects my opinion. Or most of the time or all of the time, my supervisor, 49%, gives sincere appreciation. So from this, we then look at what are the gaps. What are the areas where something is very important and we're not seeing a lot of it? And when you can look at this one factor around admits when wrong, 41%, that's the biggest gap in all of these, followed then by sincere appreciation and truly listens. So what we're talking about here then, these are gaps, these are opportunities that might be affecting us. Maybe we think we admit when we're wrong, or we think that we are giving sincere appreciation, you know, and maybe others don't necessarily see it that way. But what we know that when we close these gaps, we can drive higher performance, higher engagement from our team members. Great quote, Teddy Roosevelt, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And we know that that is true. I mean, at the end of the day, we can talk about technology, all kinds of things happening in the world, but we are dealing with people. We're dealing with people who view things emotionally, and ultimately things come down to relationships. So starting from a point of empathy is really, really important. Dale Carnegie had talked about, remember, we're not dealing with creatures of logic when we're dealing with people. We're dealing with creatures of emotion. So we need to be sensitive then to the people who are in our organizations, whether we're CEOs and we've got hundreds or thousands of people in our organization, or whether we're a manager, or just whether we're not, but the people we engage with, we need to be thinking about that from an empathetic standpoint. So when we look at leadership blind spots, and we say to ourselves, how do we identify what our own blind spots might be? The first thing might be to look at people we know. Let's just think out, even right now, if you think about someone who you know who is really exceptional at listening, we'd say, okay, who is that person that really makes me feel heard, valued, etc.? And then what is it that they're doing that makes me feel that way? Or the person who shows sincere appreciation. I have different people in my life who will send a handwritten note, reach out, and do different things to make sure that I feel appreciated when I do something that's good. And that's always a valuable thing. So who are the people in our lives that do that? And then the next thing is, let's just think about ourselves, and let's think about ourselves even just objectively, if we can, taking our own biases out, so to speak. I spoke with Alex Gorski about a week and a half ago, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson. One of the things he said is, leaders sometimes struggle because they think they have to have all the answers, that they have to be the ones who know everything. But really, to start from a point of humility and say, look, I don't have all the answers. So we can even approach someone and say, how do I do in listening? No one's perfect. What's one thing I can do better, and so forth. But uncovering those leadership blind spots and really finding out what those gaps are and improving them is something that will help us drive stronger performance and engagement with our own team members. And again, it's something that any of us can do if we think right now, and part of this talk is designed really to inspire people to have practical things that they can do coming out of this time that we have together. So the first thought is then around identifying what our blind spots are, the things that are holding us back. The second is around trust and transparency. I talk to my kids all the time about how hard trust is to gain and how easy it is to lose. And sometimes we can lose trust unintentionally, just by lack of transparency. Sometimes it could be deliberate in terms of just not being truthful. There was a case recently of a U.S. budget airline that wanted to put an AI system into place. And they knew that they had to work with employees who were following manual processes around booking. But they didn't tell them what they were doing. They just basically said, well, we're trying to figure out how we're going to onboard people, et cetera. And when the employees ultimately found out that there was a plan to put an AI system in place, even though their work wouldn't have been displaced, those people, clearly trust was violated. It was violated because the company wasn't truthful. They weren't transparent about what they were doing. And if we look at the things that drive culture, this is an MIT survey that looked at companies from an engagement standpoint, ranked them, and basically look at the ones that have grown and are at the top of the list during the COVID period, and those that are lower in the list, the bottom ones. And consistently, the most important thing is around communication and transparency of leaders. And we also see from other surveys, this is from CHG Healthcare, that increased transparency and communication is one of the most important things that drives that strong culture. And similarly, lack of transparency and communication is something that undermines culture. Now, part of the problem with communication, this is a great quote, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Sometimes we think we're communicating. I know even at Dale Carnegie, there are times I thought I was communicating clearly, and I've gotten feedback that I wasn't. So, part of this is even to be asking people. We'll send quarterly surveys to our employees, and we'll ask them, how are we doing from a communication standpoint? Because it's really an important factor in terms of driving that trust, that transparency. Another thing, and this came from the same cross-cultural research that I referenced up front when we were looking at things that motivate or demotivate employees, is this issue of reliability. And can we count on our leaders in two ways? One, external reliability. And what that really means is that this is a person who does what they say that they're going to do. I can count on them to do that. If they say we're going to do this, we're going to schedule this, it's not something that's, well, it got canceled or moved or whatever, or we said we were going to follow this strategy and then we changed it and shifted it. But the person is reliable. They're honest. They follow through on the things that they say that they're going to do. The second part of this, though, is internal reliability, which means that the leader, the person, is true to who they are. They're authentic. They're real. They're not trying to be someone that they're not. And a perfect, I think, person who reflects this is the former CEO of Pepsi, Indra Nooyi. And she was someone who for 12 years led Pepsi, and she was very clear about who she was and being true to herself. Indra was an immigrant to the United States from India. She was a mother. She was a CEO. She embraced all of those things. And in her leadership style reflected that. It also reflected the strategies that the company pursued. So part of what she said was, you know, I think we, Pepsi, need to have healthy options. And she took the company strategically in the direction of acquiring Quaker and having oatmeal and other kinds of healthy food options and really diversifying the brand far before other companies had done that. And even though there was huge shareholder pressure for her to stop and to reverse that, she didn't. She stuck with it. So that kind of character was really important in terms of her building credibility and that trust with employees, with all stakeholders, employees, leadership, the board, etc. So we're going to do another poll right now, and this is really around this concept of living our values, because ultimately, as organizations, we have values, we profess values, we talk about our values, and so the question really is, how well has your organization lived its values during really the past year? Very well. Decisions have been clearly been made based on the values that your company has said that you stand for. Pretty well. Not very well, or I don't know. So, Wes, would you take us through the poll, please?
Absolutely. So as you can see in the bottom right of the screen, you should see the options. Once again, just click the radial button to the left. Remember, this is completely anonymous. And then don't forget to click the gray submit button in the bottom right of the screen. Right, so I think we'll give it another 5 seconds. Don't forget to click the gray submit button in the bottom right of the screen. And there we go. I'm just closing the poll, just waiting for the software to work its magic behind the scenes. Another 10 seconds.
So dramatic, Wes, with the results that come through.
I need to get a soundtrack of a drum roll.
I know.
There we go, and there are the results.
Yeah, thank you very much. It looks like this is pretty positive. So most of you have said that your organizations have done a pretty good job, very well, or pretty well. Looks like 74% had said that. Only a very small percentage said not very well. So that's good. That's very important, and that's certainly a valuable part of building culture in the organization. So one of the things that Dale Carnegie had said is there are 4 ways. There's only 4 ways that we have to contact or connect with the world. You know, it's what we do, how we look, what we say, and how we say it. So being mindful of those things, and those things really around the keys to building trust. You know, we want to think about if there's a list of to-dos or things we're going to evaluate ourselves on. Number 1 is, what is our communication cadence? How are we communicating? Not only how frequently, but what modes? Is it just email? Is it email and video? Is it email, video, and town halls? What are the ways that we're communicating with people? As leaders, do we work together to make sure that messages are being cascaded through the organization? But are we communicating? How are we communicating? Even asking others to assess that. That empathy is so important. In Dale Carnegie, we've got Principle 17, try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. And again, we know that people, again, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. So really taking that time, especially with so much stress that people are under today. Being a good listener, being consistent, and creating positive relationships. These things really go toward building that trust, and trust is the foundation clearly for really all strong relationships. The third of the 4 strategies is around psychological safety. And one of the, I think, greatest leaders of our time is Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Ford, of Boeing. He took over Ford in 2006. At that time, the company was really headed on its way to bankruptcy. The culture there was extremely toxic. You have people who are actively, executives and people throughout the organization, undermining each other, openly undermining each other. And part of what Alan Mulally did was he said, we have to work together. He put a system in place called the Working Together Management System. And the core of that system was the idea that there had to be transparency around metrics, that everyone knows what the plan is, everyone knows what the status is in the plan, and everyone knows how we're going to improve and get back to a positive level. So to that extent, they'd have major projects and they'd look at them in red, yellow, and green. And one of his meetings with his executive team, this is a company that was about to lose billions of dollars, and they were looking at all their metrics and everything was green. And he said, well, geez, don't we have any problems in this company? We're about to lose billions of dollars and we're all green. People were afraid to speak up. They thought if they spoke up and said, this is red, that they'd be fired. Well, ultimately, one person did step forward and say, I've got a project that's red. And Alan clapped. He clapped. He said, we need this kind of transparency. And then other people said, well, I can help with this and so forth. And it really was a key thing to getting people to work together as a team. So that mindset of psychological safety is one where we want to encourage people to be open, to take risks, to know that they're not necessarily going to get punished if there's a mistake or whatnot. The question is, what's the plan to be able to fix it? Psychological safety is really the perception of the consequences of taking a risk. And many times people are fearful. Think about the meeting that we're in where we're afraid someone is just going to say, that's a stupid idea or whatever it is. But how do we create environments as leaders where people feel safe to be open? I was in Japan not too long before the pandemic, and I met with the CEO there, and he said, we've got brilliant people, some of the most brilliant engineers in Japan in this company, and I can't get them to tell us what they think. They're afraid. So that was something that they were working on culturally. We as Dale Carnegie were working with them to help improve that. But psychological safety is such a critical factor. Google conducted a multi-year detailed research study into the factors that drive team effectiveness. They thought maybe it was IQ or where people went to college or a whole range of other kinds of things. But ultimately what they came up with was that the number one factor that drove team effectiveness was this issue of psychological safety. People working together in an environment where they weren't afraid to be truthful, to take risks, to speak their opinion, and so forth. And clearly that's something that is really critical, especially now when we have to encourage our teams to be agile, to take risks. Our business environment right now is so fluid and will continue to be fluid, certainly for some period of time to come. It was before with just technology change, and now with COVID, so many things have been upended. So let's take a second and do our third poll, and you can check all of these that apply at work if you ever, and you can see all the things that are there. I'll turn it over to Wes to lead us through this third poll.
Absolutely, thank you so much there. And I'm opening up that poll now. So in the bottom right of the screen, you should see it. And this is a check all that apply. So don't just check one box. Go ahead, check as many as apply, and then please don't forget to click submit in the bottom right of your screen. I've seen people being a little bit more deliberate in this poll, Joe.
I can see that's well, there's a lot more to think about with this one, right, Wes?
So true. All right, so quite a few people still busy. Going to give it another 10 seconds. Race to the finish line. And don't forget to click submit in the bottom right of the screen. You'll see a gray submit button there. Okay, so closing that poll, just waiting for the software to do its magic.
Yeah, so in theory, Wes, we'd love to see this without a lot of checks, right? We know that's not necessarily reality. It'd be interesting to see which one has the highest percentage of agreement, so to speak.
Absolutely, and here we go.
Okay. So the number one result is people have said, yeah, they've been hesitant to tell the boss there's a problem. So again, as a leader, In what ways can we encourage people to come and say, hey, we tell me if there's a problem. I've got to know. We don't want to hide it. Don't want to put it under the rug. Looks like number 2 was felt like an outsider or uncomfortable being yourself on a team. Sure, that's a real thing, right? How do we create a place where people can be themselves? Because often people have phenomenal ideas that they won't share because they're afraid of what people are going to say. So those were the 2 biggest ones. Thank you for Wes for having them. The other ones, see, 37% for worried about asking for help, and then also worked in an environment where mistakes were talked about as personal failures. So the question again, I know that so many of the people who are on this are leaders. So, culture is our responsibility, particularly for the higher up we are in the organization from a responsibility standpoint. So how do we encourage people around these issues? So one thing, if we want to assess our team, and we can take these 5 things out of this meeting and go back and talk to our teams about them. True or false? If we make a mistake, is it held against you? Do people feel comfortable raising tough issues and problems? Do some of our team members reject others for being different? And if so, how can we make that better? How do we minimize that? It's difficult to ask other team members for help. I mean, sometimes it's just any one of us can be the one to say, look, can I help you? How can I help? What can I do? I can offer this. And then the last one is, no one on my team would deliberately act in a way that undermines my efforts. So hopefully we don't have that. That is the recipe for a toxic culture, clearly. So the benefits of psychological safety, certainly collaboration, getting people to work together, opening up innovation and creativity, and then agility. And agility is such a critical factor, as I mentioned earlier today. We have to be fluid as we work today in our organizations. So here are some additional tips for creating psychological safety. We've talked about some of these things in terms of assessing where we are, and yet here are some things that we can do also individually. Not going to go through all of these, but certainly, which one of these, if you look at these, might be one that you or I might work on to improve the psychological safety of our team. The fourth and final strategy is really around the concept of resilience. Again, if we think back to this past year, resilience and dealing with just the fear and the stress that we've gone through has been critical. On September 11th, the investment firm of Sandler O'Neill was on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center. That day, that company lost about 40% of their employees, about 2/3 of their management team. The next day, the surviving members of the management team came together. Jimmy Dunn was the head of the management committee, and they made a decision. And you can imagine just the grief that they must have felt, just the shock, all that they had felt, and what kinds of decisions they may have made about moving forward. But they basically said, look, our purpose moving forward is to survive. This firm is going to survive and show the terrorists that they cannot win. And they defined 3 specific objectives. One was to assess how their people were from a health and safety standpoint. 2 was to make sure that they were moving forward in a way that was protecting their own people and making sure that they were safe and healthy and able to work moving forward. And the 3rd was to ensure that the clients knew that the company was going to continue. Within 2 days, they had made public announcements. Within 3 days, they had temporary offices. Within a week, they had hired 13 people. Within 3 weeks, they had returned to profitability. They announced full-time offices, locations for offices. And in January, they were at pre-9/11 profitability levels. That they had, really rebuilt so much of what they had lost, even overcoming just that tremendous personal loss in terms of their team members. And you think about what was the inner strength that helped them be able to do that, and think about ourselves, even in the wake of COVID and all that has been scary in this past year. What is it that's been able us to be resilient? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity. And if we look at resilience from 4 standpoints, you'll see from left to right, the top line is chronic. So something adverse happens and the person really cannot recover. They struggle, they're just completely more or less just paralyzed by their fear. The second one, the purple line, is delayed. So they start out having a very challenging way, this is recovered, to deal with this adversity, but over time, they're then able to be functional and positive and productive again. The third is delayed. And this is where they start out not so bad, but then it gets worse over time. They get paralyzed over time. They're unable to function over time. The fourth is where we want to be, where we are faced with adversity. We're faced with a horribly challenging situation, but we're able to manage it. We're able to continue to function. We're able to continue to lead and to persevere. And what we find is that there are a couple of different factors that are really very important. That positivity and confidence. People who are positive, 71% of people who have positive attitudes, positive mindsets are resilient. Now, this doesn't mean that they aren't facing the challenges. They recognize the challenges, but they've got positive attitude about how they're going to approach them. And confidence is another one. It's not to say that we're not concerned, but it is to say, look, as we look back, I can see all the different times in my life that I've been able to get through these tough situations, and I know we're going to get through this too. Those people are twice as likely to be resilient. Excuse me. Dale Carnegie had said that the biggest lesson he ever learned was about the importance of our thoughts. And our thoughts and our ability to control our thoughts and not to be consumed by negativity, by stress, by worry is absolutely the most important thing that determines whether or not we can be resilient. I mean, ultimately, if we think about the past year that we've had together as a world, as a society, I mean, we've had fear, but fear is a liar. So many times we have this false evidence appearing real, and people who are resilient are able to put fear in its place and we can remind ourselves, both from a positivity standpoint and a confidence standpoint, about the times that we've been able to get through things, and that things have not been as bad as we thought they were going to be, that times we've gotten through those challenging times. Strategies for developing resilience, both with confidence and positivity. And we have to start with ourselves first, right? We can't give what we don't have. It's the old adage about being on an airplane, and if the mask comes down, you have to put it on yourself first before you can help someone else. So what are the things that we can do ourselves to build confidence and positivity and really be resilient so that we can then help others around us be resilient? This idea of living in day-tight compartments is critical. Excuse me. What it really means is that I've got the beginning of this day and the end of this day. I'm going to focus on the things that are the most important things to do today. I'm going to focus on the things I can control. It's not to say I'm not going to think about or be prepared, be concerned about a presentation tomorrow or a meeting tomorrow. We can do that, but worry doesn't have a place in that. Worry is something we're going to put worry outside of that, kind of like a compartment, like in a ship where it's airtight. Ask yourself what's the worst that could possibly happen. Prepare to accept that and then improve on it. So often, the things that we fear don't happen. They never happen. And even if they do happen, they're not as bad as we think. So recognizing that is a core way to building that personal, that strength, that inner strength, that confidence. And then this is what Dale Carnegie ultimately said: fill your mind with thoughts of peace, courage, health, and hope. We can choose to focus on whatever we want to focus on. We can always focus on the things that are going wrong. One of the things that we do in Dale Carnegie when we have programs or meetings is we say, what's one thing that's going well? What's progress? What's good news? And the reason we do that is not to avoid with the other things we may talk about, but let's focus on the things that are getting right. There's lots of times to think about and focus on the challenges that we have to deal with. And at the same time, what are the things that are going right? We can then model that to other people and really give other people a fine reputation to live up to. Give those people an ability to help, support them through empathy through some of the challenges that they may have so that they too can be resilient. And also to build their confidence. One of the things that Dale Carnegie talks about is to praise every improvement and praise the slightest improvement, really to be hearty in the appreciation we give people. So sometimes if we see something small, if it's progress, let's recognize that, because that builds on confidence. I mean, I think about, my own kids, and, if someone does something right, it's great. Let's focus on what you did right. We'll help you with the other things too. So the fourth strategy really is about developing resilience. It is about looking at things and seeing them for what they are, seeing them for the opportunity. Part of the way I looked at this past year was, if it's true that this is a huge crisis, then it should also be true that there's huge opportunity. If it's unprecedented crisis, there's also unprecedented opportunity. So if we have that mindset, we're going to be resilient. We can build better companies, better teams. So the way that we can move forward in tough times, the summary really for the entire talk, is number one, thinking about our blind spots. What are the areas, what's one thing that we can do to engage our team members more effectively, to uncover something that we may be doing inadvertently that undermines our team. The second is really working on that trust, making sure that we're being consistent, that we're doing the things that we say that we're going to do, and that we are also being authentic to who we are. Building that psychological safety, encouraging people to speak up and to share their thoughts, to share their ideas, and to have an environment where that's rewarded. And then the last is develop the resilience in ourselves, our people, and our organization. Really, how can we, in what ways can we build positivity and confidence in our teams? The good news as we look at where we are right now, there is light. We can look ahead and we can see that we are going in a good direction as a country and as a world. And with luck and good fortune, we'll be through this very quickly. And at the same time, this idea of building culture never stops. We want to continue to build positive, strong cultures in all that we do. So I thank you. We have some time, I think, for questions. I'm going to turn it over to Wesley to help lead us through any questions. But who has the first question, Wes?
Absolutely. So I've actually put a Q&A pod in the bottom of the screen. So if you see, you'll see Q&A underneath the chat. All you have to do is just put your question in there. And then also just to note that I believe, David, you can just give us some elaboration, but I believe that you and Joe are going to be holding a podcast after this to answer any questions that we aren't able to answer in this particular webinar.
Wes, that is correct. We're going to be holding a podcast tomorrow. Joe will be joining one of my other colleagues, Mark Heath, and I in a McKonly Asbury podcast, as well as Carla Doyle, who is the president and CEO of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Dale Carnegie franchise. So we will get through as many of the questions that are in the chat here today as we can, and then whatever is remaining, we're going to have a podcast with Joe tomorrow to talk a little bit more about those remaining questions, and it's just get a little bit more in depth into some of the conversation that Joe had today.
Absolutely. Okay, so I've got some questions coming through in the Q&A pod. So Joe, Claudia wants to know, what are some tools that we can use to build resilience in ourselves and to assist our staff?
So in my experience, some of the tools that, again, it starts with us, and I think even about the things that we do each day. We talk about what are our habits and what are our thoughts. So even taking time to think about when we have something that's in our mind that's negative, just being able to see it and call it out. And sometimes, by the way, we can see that within our teams, and basically call that out too. Another thing, frankly, that Dale Carnegie talked about, and I embrace every single day, is the idea of gratitude. It's hard to be grateful and unhappy at the same time. If we just take a few minutes to think about even 1 or 2 or 10 things that we're grateful for, a lot of the negativity, a lot of the fear that we have can go away. Because, again, we can't help other people until we can help ourselves. Another thing that we do at Dale Carnegie is we do use surveys. We do quarterly pulse surveys internally just to ask people about, where they are and how they're doing. We also will have, on a regular basis, and through our team meetings and so forth, this is something we talk about. We try to talk about, how are we doing from a psychological safety standpoint? How are we doing against our values? Does everyone understand where we're going as a company? We talk about transparency. What's the vision? What's the strategy? What's the plan? How do you connect to that? We've done that over and over and over because ultimately that enables people to really have greater purpose on what they're doing. So those are some things that I might recommend, and certainly there are many others.
Absolutely. I mean, Jenny, you asked, will participants receive a copy of the presentation? We won't be sharing a copy of the slides, but we will be sharing a copy of the recording. So you'll be able to go through that and just catch up on anything that you might have missed. All right. Chad wants to know, during times of organization change, with limited options to be open or transparent, any recommendations to build culture through those times?
Well, I guess if I'm understanding the question correctly, I mean, I guess the question I would have is, what is the reason why it's limited? Is it sometimes one of the questions I get a lot, and I don't know if this is kind of in Chad's question too, is there may not be that leadership support of openness. Someone will say, gosh, if I'm not the CEO, if I'm not a top leader, and the culture we have is one where openness is not rewarded, what can I do? The thing I would say is every single person has the ability to control what they do and what they say. And ultimately, this comes down to building relationship, talking to supervisors, talking to team members, being the person that says, can I be the one to help? How can I help? That's a good idea, and so forth. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, because sometimes that's implicit in the question. Ultimately, if one is not in a position to be making the higher decisions, we still can make decisions about the things that we do ultimately and the way that we behave, and making sure that we're true to ourselves. Because ultimately, that's critical. When we're not true to ourselves, that creates stress and burnout and frustration. And and there may be a situation we can't be that way. That is why people do leave organizations. So hopefully that isn't required, but that does happen too.
Right. And then I've got a question here. I'm gonna keep it anonymous. The person says, I recognize that I fail on making sure that I make people feel comfortable to share mistakes or ideas. I can be somewhat high-tempered. What could I do to help that?
I'm sorry, Wes, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat that. I just could not hear the beginning part of the question.
Okay, so the person says, I recognize that I fail on making sure that I make people feel comfortable to be open to share their mistakes or ideas. And then I guess the question is, what can I do to help that?
First of all, I mean, I would just compliment the person who's asking the question to have that level of self-awareness, because so often people don't even see how they are inhibiting that kind of openness on their teams. What I would recommend is to talk to the people with whom you work or engage, and to ask them sincerely. By the way, I had someone that I'd worked with at one point who was really unintentionally, completely unaware of the impact that he was having on other people. We actually brought in a coach to help him, and one of the first things the coach did was to have a 360, with the team members, where the team was encouraged to give feedback. So that feedback is valuable. But I would think even by going to people, even one person, and just saying, look, I recognize that sometimes I can do things that make it hard for people to be open. And I'm just trying to be honest. I want to improve on that. And, what's one thing that you think I can do that will make a difference? And that kind of humility, by the way, when I talked to Alex Gorski, I mentioned him earlier because the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, when I spoke to him the other day, that was something he said, great leaders have humility, and all of us need to have humility. None of us have all the answers. None of us are perfect. None of us should be expected to be perfect. So what can we learn from each other? And that might be my encouragement to the person who asked that question.
Awesome. And then I've got a gentleman saying, what is the best leadership approach as a vice president of an old established company with older employees when you are in your 30s?
The issue of cross-generational leadership is a challenging one. And often people who see someone younger might be either intimidated, or they're worried, they're insecure, and so forth. So in my experience, it is to try to address people, to work with people one-on-one, to build a relationship where, first of all, the mindset sometimes is, who is this person going to tell me what to do? You got a lot to learn. I'll show you. So you can leverage that. Ask, hey, I know I'm a vice president here. You've been here for a certain period of time. I would love to hear what your thoughts are about A and B and C and D. And the person might even be disarmed. It's like, well, you're asking, yeah, I'd love to hear your opinion. I know you've been here, you've got great thoughts. What do you have to share? And I'd like to be able to leverage that or work together on that. So ultimately, there's no way around the fact in my mind that there has to be a building up of relationship with those specific people who feel that way. And ultimately, over time, if we're able to develop that trust, then that the age issue goes away. But because it's less about the age issue. I think it's about underlying issues about who are you to tell me, and you think you're more important than me, and I'm insecure about my job. You can take my. Those I think some of the underlying issues.
Right. And also just being respectful of time, just letting everybody know that we have got your questions. If you haven't asked your question in the Q&A, please do that. We did mention that Joe and David are going to be doing a podcast that will be available for you to be able to answer your questions. Time for one last question, and this comes from a gentleman who says, my whole team is remote, but not based around computers or not based around using computers. We are a school transportation business. What is the best way to keep up with each other since we can't meet weekly and have been hurting from this lack of business community culture?
That's a real challenge. Clearly, especially if people aren't in front of computers, and that's an easy way to stay connected. I guess I would look at the next best way to do it. Whatever way you can create connection, I would encourage it. It may be phone calls or conference calls, or perhaps there's an opportunity to socially distance and be in the same environment from time to time. Maybe it is written communication. Maybe it's a combination of all of those things, But yeah, this is definitely a hard situation, because I think certainly office workers have a greater opportunity to be connected. In your situation, that's not the case. So it would just be it's going to require more intentionality, probably a little more thought, more consistency, but it'll be worth it.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that is it. David, I'm going to hand over to you to close the session and let us know where to go from here.
Absolutely, Wes. Thank you very much. And thank you, Joe Hart. And thank everybody for joining us today. A recording of today's presentation will be posted on McKonly Asbury's website and through our social media outlets. Website is www.macpas.com. Tomorrow, we're going to host a podcast with Joe Hart and Carla Doyle from Dale Carnegie's Mid-Atlantic franchise, and we're going to go through the other questions that we still have to answer. We're going to do a little bit more deep dive into a couple of the matters that Joe talked, and just kind of get more from Joe in regards to who Joe is, and how Joe sees Dale Carnegie. You can listen to the podcast on Monday. It will be posted on Monday at our website, www.macpas.com/podcast. And again, thanks again for everybody for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I just put that link in the chat for you to be able to click on, copy, paste, whatever you need. And we're going to stop the recording right now. Thanks for joining us. We trust you make it a fantastic week further.